called out the media. Does he acknowledge he also has a direct role to play?
Look, there's a big difference between comments made and actions taken. The president is certainly not responsible for sending suspicious packages to someone, no more than Bernie Sanders was responsible for a supporter of his shooting up a Republican baseball field practice last year. The idea that this is at the hands of the president is absolutely ridiculous.
Anyone else notice the White House driveway passes for the new White House briefing room? They have a perfectly nice briefing room right inside the structure. We haven't seen much of Sarah Huckabee Sanders on camera in recent weeks. But today, the White House press secretary defended the president's comments, blaming the media for anger in America. Just last night at his rally in Wisconsin, he called for all sides to come together in peace and harmony. His words, following news that these explosive devices have been mailed to top Democrats and to CNN. Peter Baker and Jeremy Peters of the New York Times write, quote, upset that critics linked a spate of pipe bombs targeting his adversaries to his own angry messaging. Mr. Trump abandoned the scripted call for national solidarity he issued the day before and lashed out at perceived enemies for fomenting the toxic political environment they say he has encouraged. Earlier today, former Republican strategist Steve Schmidt said to find the parallel to what we are witnessing right now this week, you'd have to go all the way back to 1865.
We haven't seen anything like it since the night Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. This was a mass assassination attempt, including two former presidents, a former vice president of the United States, a former attorney general of the United States, a former chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee. The person who is responsible for sending bombs to all of those people is the person who mailed the bombs. Donald Trump did not mail the bombs, but he created the atmosphere where a sick person would look at those individuals and see an enemy.
Boy, that's saying a lot. Anita Kumar is with us, White House correspondent for McClatchy Newspapers, and the aforementioned Jeremy Peters back with us, political reporter for the New York Times. Anita, Steve Schmidt has this way of focusing the mind. And when you hear it in those words, when you hear the list of recipients of these packages, it really focuses the mind. Question for you is the White House political operation just continuing to go forward unabated? We had Wisconsin last night. President's got North Carolina tomorrow night. Are these parallel universes?
Well, I don't think you're going to see the president stop campaigning. He's going to be, as you mentioned, campaigning in Friday and Saturday, and I can expect him to be campaigning every day till the election November 6th. You know, they felt like yesterday at the White House that when CNN issued their statement, sort of pushing back on the president's comments, and I think Sarah Huckabee Sanders as well, they felt like that statement was over the top, that it just overdid it, and that they could go back to their message of the longtime strategy of pushing back on the media. That was the message that kind of did it for them, that statement from CNN. And they felt like, okay, they overdid it, so we can go back to bashing the media. The thing that's been working with their base, the thing that they've been talking about, you know, for months and months since they've been there in the administration, and talking about all these campaign rallies. The other thing is that you saw a lot of Democrats also, you know, agree with the media or agree with CNN. And so they went back to pushing back on the Democrats, this angry mob. So they've gone back to the same strategy that they've had from the very beginning.
Jeremy, you and Peter Baker quote John Brennan, who tweeted this today. Stop blaming others. Look in the mirror. This is directed at the president, who called Brennan a lowlife and pulled his security clearance. Stop blaming others. Look in the mirror. Your inflammatory rhetoric, insults, lies, and encouragement of physical violence are disgraceful. Clean up your act. Try to act presidential. The American people deserve much better. By the way, your critics will not be intimidated into silence. So that's John Brennan, who, as I said last night, doesn't scare easily, former head of the CIA, longtime overseas station chief for the CIA. But, Jeremy, when he turns around, who's with him? And would we know it if this were going to be a turning point?
I would not expect a turning point at all, Brian. I mean, what was it, 12 hours that it took the president to abandon his calls for reconciliation and national unity before he was out seeing a victim in all of this, that victim being himself? So, no, there's not really going to be another Donald Trump, and I don't know that there's going to be one for the remainder of his presidency. This is the guy that was elected, and he's going to stay that way. I think what we have to come to terms with and expect from now on is, if we don't already, is that in situations like this, we don't have a unifier. We don't have an empathetic leader like we have had in these moments of national trauma where, say, Bill Clinton spoke to the nation after the Oklahoma City bombings and said that he rejected the voices that foment paranoia. The problem right now is that those voices are in the president's ear every day. The president often gives platform to them. Sometimes the president himself is that voice. And that's really what's different about our political culture at this moment. I will add that when Bill Clinton spoke out against those angry, paranoid voices after the Oklahoma City bombing, it was widely assumed that he was referring to people like Rush Limbaugh, who angrily reacted after Clinton spoke. Well, yesterday, what Rush Limbaugh did, 25 years later, was come out and say that these bombings were likely a Democratic ploy.
Yep. Saw that, noted that on our broadcast last night. And the notion you just gave voice to is actually our last segment tonight, looking at other presidents at other moments in our history. Anita, this is what happens when Sarah Sanders, when the White House talks about this president and his relationship to acts or words of violence. I'm going to play for you Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and then we'll come out of that and I'll play for you the president in Montana.
Look, the president's condemned violence in all forms, has done that since day one, will continue to do that, but certainly feels that everyone has a role to play.
And by the way, never wrestle him. You understand that? Never. Any guy that can do a body slam, he's my kind of... He's my guy.
Body slam, of course, in that case was a journalist. Anita, those two disparate elements are hard to reconcile.
Yeah, I mean, Sarah's right about one thing, which is the president sometimes does do what she's saying. He does occasionally in certain moments, after a mass shooting yesterday, briefly, after a hurricane, will say something that she would call presidential, that unites the country. But it's for about 5-10 minutes, right? It's for maybe an hour. And then most of the time, he's the person you just showed or just played in the rally. So, I mean, it goes back and forth. And obviously, the times where he's uniting the country is much less frequent, right? So he'll say one thing and then he'll go right back to talking about, body slamming a reporter or, locking her up or any of those other things. And so it's hard to reconcile those things. It's hard to believe him when he can go right back to saying something else.
Jeremy, you got this other colleague there at the Times named Maggie Haberman, who tweeted this tonight. Trump's tweet this morning wasn't a one-off. This is about the southern border and the caravan and immigration. He is looking at closing the border entirely as a pre-election effort to stoke his base. Not clear that this would ever actually happen, only that the White House will likely drive it till November 6th. We should probably say, Jeremy, as a viewer's guide, closing the southern border, it's 2,000 miles long. It is likely that if we called home every deployed member of the U.S. military, we still could not close the southern border. It appears to be a shiny object, but, Jeremy, this could be the next topic they'll roll out.
A shiny object, perhaps, and a prelude to the arguments I expect to hear from the president and his allies in Congress in the months ahead to build his wall, to get the funding from the Congress for that. So, yes, I mean, this is really, I think, an effort to gin up the base before the midterms. The president can close down segments of the border. Sure, we saw Reagan do that. George W. Bush did that at certain ports of entry after 9/11. This president, however, is fond of talking of using the military to execute border control operations. And that's something that it's not clear he has the legal authority to do. What's more, as my colleagues pointed out in their piece tonight on on Trump's plans, his talks of shutting down the border, whatever that means, there certainly would be legal action that would follow any steps the president took along these lines. So I don't think this is concrete by any stretch of the imagination yet.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.